Welcome to today's webinar, Energy Development and Transportation Priorities, brought to you by NCSL. All lines have been placed on a listen-only mode to provide favorable sound quality during today's presentation. If you would like to submit a question at any time during the webinar, you may use the chat box located on the lower right-hand side of your screen. Simply type your message into the box and click on the send button. If you should require assistance throughout the conference, please press *0 on your telephone keypad to reach a live operator. It is now my pleasure to turn the floor over to Jim Reed. Sir, the floor is yours.
Thank you, and good afternoon. Welcome to the NCSL webinar on energy development and transportation priorities. Energy and transportation issues are significant policy topics for state legislatures in 2013. Today's webinar will cover trends in state legislation in energy policy and the fiscal situation regarding transportation, particularly how states are attempting to pay for much-needed transportation investment. My name is Jim Reed. I am the Group Director for Environment, Energy, and Transportation at NCSL, and I will be the moderator of today's program. Webinar participants will hear today from several NCSL policy experts in energy and transportation. We will have 4 presenters today, and they will take a combined 45 minutes or so to go through a PowerPoint presentation. We'll then have about 15 minutes to take questions that you submit in the chat box in the lower right side of your screen. You can type in a question at any time, and we'll try to get to as many questions as possible after the presentations. With us today to dig into these topics are 4 NCSL subject matter experts. Speaking first is Jacqueline Pless, who is our policy specialist on energy and fossil fuels. She will discuss natural gas development and recent state legislative activity related to severance taxes, hydraulic fracturing, and governance issues. Next will be Glenn Anderson, NCSL's Energy Program Director, to discuss state energy reliability legislation, renewable energy, and energy efficiency efforts. After Glenn, we'll switch gears to transportation. And covering the topic of transportation funding and finance is Jamie Rawl, Senior Policy Specialist in Transportation at NCSL. She will discuss the very significant developments underway this year as legislatures try to match transportation needs with necessary revenues. Following Jamie will be Ann Teagan, NCSL's expert on traffic safety, who will illuminate a growing topic of legislative concern relating to the need for transportation safety improvements, particularly in rural areas. As well, we have NCSL specialist in federal policy relating to energy and transportation, Ben Hush. He contributed to these presentations, and he's available on this webinar to address any federal policy questions that may arise. So with these introductions complete, I will now turn it over to Jacqueline Pless for the first presentation.
Thank you, Jim. As Jim mentioned, my name is Jacqueline Pless. I work in the energy program here at NCSL. Energy has emerged as a dominant issue in the state legislatures as state policymakers develop legislation to promote economic development, ensure affordability and reliability, and protect the environment. In 2013, development of our energy resources and the dramatic upswing in natural gas development are key issues being addressed in state houses across the nation. The following presentations on energy policy trends will provide a brief summary of a few of the issues state legislators are confronting this year, including natural gas development, renewable energy, and energy efficiency and energy reliability. I'm going to start off talking about natural gas development and then turn the stage over to Glenn. Recent technological advances in hydraulic fracturing and horizontal drilling have opened up unconventional resources that were uneconomical to develop or inaccessible just a decade ago. This has expanded supplies so much that some project current consumption levels could be sustained for another 90 years. This abundant domestic supply of a relatively cheap and clean-burning fossil fuel offers energy security benefits as well as tremendous economic benefits to state and local economies through job creation, economic growth, tax revenues, and lower natural gas prices. However, rapid expansion into sometimes densely populated regions and areas unfamiliar with resource extraction has increased public concern about its potential effects on human health and the environment. In particular, there has been heightened attention to natural gas extraction impacts on public drinking water resources and air quality. And just a quick note about what exactly hydraulic fracturing is before we move on. It's a term that I'll use frequently throughout the presentation. Hydraulic fracturing is an oil and gas extraction method that uses hydraulic pressure to create fractures in shale rock. Hydraulic pressure is used to create to send pressurized liquids underground to help release trapped gas, and it allows for commercially viable access to previously inaccessible unconventional oil and gas resources, such as shale gas. Here we can see how shale is playing an increasingly important role in the nation's energy portfolio. This shows U.S. gas production projections through 2040, and projections indicate that the Marcellus region alone could provide enough natural gas to satisfy U.S. demand for at least a decade. States are interested in developing the resources that they have, and many state legislators are proposing bills aimed to ensure safe extraction of natural gas while also taking advantage of the tremendous economic potential. Although a number of federal regulations govern the hydraulic fracturing process, states have regulatory primacy on this issue. More than 170 bills across 29 states were introduced last legislative session addressing natural gas extraction. While this reflects a high level of state interest and activity, just 14 of those 29 states enacted legislation, which suggests that some states may still be exploring what level and type of regulation may be most suitable for their unique needs, and there will likely be a high level of legislative activity again in 2013. Legislative proposals have spanned across many areas of natural gas development, from exploring avenues to generate revenue to measures to help protect the environment and human health. Specific proposals address severance taxes, impact fees, well spacing and setback requirements, waste treatment and disposal regulations, hydraulic fracturing fluid additives and composition disclosure, and levels of governance regarding who should have authority to regulate. One way for states to capture the economic benefits that natural gas development offers is through severance taxes. Severance taxes are excise taxes on resources extracted from the earth and have historically been a significant source of revenue for energy-rich states. Most natural gas-producing states have some form of severance tax. Many times, the generated revenue is used to help localities offset the impacts of local drilling activities, fund environmental projects, or even to help balance state budgets. In 2012, 12 states introduced legislation that addressed severance taxes, and the bills varied significantly. While some states are looking to either impose new taxes or amend existing tax structures, others are aiming to alter revenue allocation methods or to introduce tax exemptions and credits for certain wells. One of the more frequently addressed topics in the states is related to increasing transparency and monitoring of the fluids that are injected in the process by requiring disclosure of hydraulic fracturing fluid components. Both existing requirements and legislative proposals on this topic vary significantly. Some states are considering requiring lists of additives, others are requiring disclosure of fluid composition as well. Addressing trade secrets in this context has also been of particular interest. Wyoming was the first state to approve rules requiring public disclosure in June 2010, and in 2011, Texas became the first state to pass this requirement through legislation. Another legislative trend has been to address levels of governance. 10 states last session introduced bills addressing levels of governance, most of which either were to delegate responsibility to regulate to the states or to address local ordinance requirements. 5 of those states, Idaho, Kansas, North Dakota, South Dakota, and Utah, passed bills or resolutions that delegated responsibility to regulate to the states. 14 states enacted legislation last session that addressed natural gas development in some way. 5 of those bills or resolutions, as I just mentioned, address levels of governance, and 3 states address fluid disclosure. And 2 states also passed bills related to severance taxes. Idaho's House Bill 379 imposes tax on oil and gas production, and Oklahoma's Senate Bill 885 related to taxes on certain types of wells. In terms of the bills that passed related to fluid additive disclosure, Indiana's House Bill 1107 required adoption of reporting and disclosure rules, including volumes of additives to be disclosed as a maximum percentage of the total fluid volume. Louisiana's House Bill 957 provided for the disclosure of hydraulic fluid composition within 20 days of hydraulic fracturing a well. And then in Pennsylvania, it's cut off here, but Pennsylvania's House Bill 1950 was a bill that addressed a number of topics such as impact fees, well setbacks, local ordinances, and well location restrictions, but it also included provisions pertaining to disclosure. Other enacted legislation includes a bill out of Maryland that established a presumptive impact area around gas wells, and it required certain water supplies to be replaced. In New Jersey, there are 2 resolutions that urge Congress to enact the FRAC Act. In North Carolina, Senate Bill 820 authorized hydraulic fracturing and required the Mining and Energy Commission and other agencies to develop a regulatory program. In Ohio, Senate Bill 315 included provisions related to horizontal wells, production, training, and employment. As I mentioned, in Pennsylvania, a very comprehensive bill, House Bill 1950, addressed a number of natural gas-related topics. In Tennessee, a resolution, House Resolution 98, encouraged a meeting to collaborate and propose regulations, and Vermont's House Bill 464 prohibited hydraulic fracturing in the state. Another somewhat related topic is that of natural gas pipelines. As the nation continues to explore developing domestic unconventional resources, many states are also looking at how to ensure that this gas is transported safely and reliably to end users. The U.S. natural gas pipeline network is expansive and the safest and least costly method of transporting oil and gas. The importance of pipeline infrastructure is likely to grow due to this increase in domestic production. And ensuring pipeline reliability offers energy security advantages and is critical for meeting demand. More than 50 bills across more than 20 states were introduced last session addressing oil and gas pipelines, and this legislative activity and interest is also expected to be similar in 2013. Although states do have regulatory primacy on natural gas development regulation, there are a few key items at the federal level to note. First, there's an ongoing U.S. Environmental Protection Agency study that investigates the impacts of hydraulic fracturing on water. The results from the study are expected to be released in 2014. Second, the U.S. Department of Interior sent a revised proposal of rules governing hydraulic fracturing on federal land to the White House for review. The proposed rule would require chemical disclosure and address environmental issues related to water flowback. This rule is expected to be finalized in July. And lastly, the Energy Information Administration released its early release of their annual Energy Outlook for 2013, which projected that natural gas use will go up and increase in importance, and the U.S. will be a natural gas net exporter by 2020. So shale gas has transformed the domestic energy outlook. Natural gas development offers tremendous economic benefits, such as jobs, generated revenue, and lower gas prices. As development has moved into more densely populated regions, however, there's been an increased public concern about its potential effects on human health and the environment. State legislatures are expected to continue exploring how to ensure that this important domestic resource is developed safely while also taking advantage of its economic potential. With that, I will turn it over to Glenn Anderson to discuss the other energy-related topics.
Thanks, Jacqueline. So there's been quite a lot of movement on a host of energy topics, and I'll be just touching on scratching the surface of them briefly in the rest of the energy presentation. The first thing I'd like to talk about is energy reliability. This issue has been brought to the forefront really with some of with the latest Hurricane Sandy and with some of the other extreme events that have been experienced around the U.S. A few points about energy reliability. Electricity is critical for fresh water, emergency response, telecommunications, food supply, and many other essential services. State policies do play a critical role by ensuring adequate responses to shortages, disruptions, and emergencies, and better response and more resilient infrastructure will help protect consumers and reduce economic losses. Just to clarify some of the potential economic losses that do result from power outages specifically, there's many other types of energy challenges that states do face. But the Northeast blackout of 2003, where 50 million customers lost power, was estimated to have resulted in between $4 and $10 billion in economic losses. So the reasons for being adequately prepared for energy emergencies are fairly compelling. In addition, I wanted to add that as a result of some efforts by DOE and state energy offices themselves, most states have developed energy reliability and energy assurance plans on how to respond to and reduce the impact of energy emergencies. However, there's still a lot of work that obviously can be done on the legislative level to promote the implementation of these plans and also to assist in responding to emergencies as well. Hurricane Sandy really clarified the importance of energy reliability with its tremendous disruption of the electricity delivery system. As a result, more than 8 million customers did lose power. It really highlighted some critical infrastructure problems. Some of those linked to heating, space heating, water pumps, which obviously are powered by electricity and deliver fresh water to residences, charging of cell phones and operations of communication systems, elevator service, which folks might not think about until their power is out in taller buildings, police operations. In some cases, those that didn't have backup power basically were rendered with significant challenges and unable to respond in some cases. And obviously, fuel pumping and fuel stations are unable to pump gas as well, and food availability if there is not obviously electricity for the supermarket. One of the things that was clear after the event was that not all utilities are in the same state of readiness. Some manage logistics and communicate with customers and local officials better than others. One thing I wanted to add that there were some bright spots with regards to energy, energy production during some of these outages, in that some facilities had implemented implemented a technology called combined heat and power, where they utilized natural gas to generate their electricity and to generate heat as well. It's a very efficient technology that some of these facilities had utilized, and natural gas pipelines are buried and thus are more resilient and resistant to interruptions and disruptions, unlike electricity. So, just an example of some of the efforts. States are increasing their interest in planning and infrastructure hardening to increase energy reliability and energy assurance. For instance, New Jersey, obviously, which was hard hit during the hurricane, has introduced more than 16 bills since late 2012. And one example would be the Reliability, Preparedness, and Storm Response Act, which requires development and enforcement of performance benchmarks for service reliability, service disruption preparedness as well, service restoration, and communications for electric public utilities. There were a number of other New Jersey bills, as I mentioned, one of them being utility infrastructure, requiring that utility infrastructure maps be available to emergency planners and responders, and also requiring backup power. Obviously, the issue of enabling critical services to operate during power outage is important. So requiring some of these bills required backup power, for example, for first aid and ambulance facilities, rescue squad, pharmacies, firehouses, boarding houses, and grocery stores, gas stations. It also provided some tax deductions for the purchase of these generators. So at least 8 other states have introduced bills requiring specifically the backup generator, requiring backup generators for gas stations, medical facilities, and other buildings. And as an example, Connecticut, House Bill 5375 would require backup generators for public water supply systems, including public community well water systems, as well as private homeowners association systems. Florida and Louisiana already require service stations to have access to backup power. New York and New Jersey have legislation pending on the issue. On the federal side, $20 million has been dedicated to strengthening cybersecurity and to efforts on critical infrastructure in response. Also, the President did release a presidential policy directive on critical infrastructure security and resilience, which outlines the energy sector as being uniquely critical. And for its functions, it provides to states, and that DOE is in charge of critical infrastructure and energy infrastructure protection. So, renewable energy. There was quite a lot of activity on renewable energy, or has been over the last year, particularly because renewable energy provides an increasingly large part of many states' energy portfolios, and is likely, well, will continue to grow in 2013, since 29 states do have renewable electricity mandates, in addition to numerous other incentives to promote renewables, although in many states they are growing quickly without state incentives, just under the federal with the federal incentive. So those requirements range from 10 to 40%. These renewable energy requirements. So you can by the year 2020, 2025, there will be a significant expansion in renewable energy, which along with it brings some challenges. So currently 5 states get more than 10% of their electricity from wind, for example. Texas is at 10% wind. At one point in November, on November 30th of last year, it actually peaked at 26% of its electricity coming from wind during that portions of that day. Iowa is currently at approximately 20% of its electricity coming from wind, and that is actually surpassed by South Dakota, which gets approximately 22% of its electricity from wind. While providing new jobs and economic growth for rural areas, some states are discussing siting and costs and some of the other challenges. So some of the popular issues for 2013 include tax incentives, siting, financing, renewable portfolio standards, and net metering. There were more than 400 bills this year introduced, so it's a very active area. On siting, for example, Minnesota, Illinois, and Massachusetts have introduced bills that address county and municipal authority to create statewide siting rules or to prohibit installations in some cases, while Illinois and Massachusetts are considering minimum setbacks for turbines. One of the other issues that's growing is what's called community net metering. Net metering itself is basically where customers receive the financial credit for the power they generate from their on-site systems that is fed back into the grid. This does not allow for group, say, condo owners or groups of farmers and municipalities to take advantage of this type of incentive. So a number of states, 8 currently have pending legislation to offer community net metering. For example, New York has a bill which will provide for ownership and operation of energy generating equipment by municipalities, groups of farmers and businesses, and allows net metering and allows net metering of the electricity used by these members. So not just for renewables, but it would also be for other types of distributed generation, such as combined heat and power. So in addition, there have been some efforts to roll back or repeal renewable energy standards. In the past year, 13 states have introduced bills aimed at delaying or reducing state renewable electricity mandates. And although none of the bills have passed, there are still some pending. Some of the concerns have been over electric rates, and in some states, utilities have done assessments of rate impacts, although most states also have within their RPS limits on the amount of impact that can be seen by these renewable standards. Otherwise, they can basically have a safety valve allowing the utilities to stop implementation if the cost is too high. So, as an example, there's been some efforts to repeal in Ohio and Michigan. Maryland has also introduced a bill to repeal solar set-aside. There's been some states that are looking to freeze, delay, or expand to include hydropower, which also will basically eliminate new development of renewables. There's been some efforts also to include other types of energy, such as natural gas power from converted coal plants, and to allow nuclear energy from a power plant in Wisconsin is another example. So energy efficiency is also a very popular topic in state legislatures. It's something that I believe is growing in part because energy efficiency investments can be attractive, particularly in a tough economy. States have found that efficiency programs can free up money that would otherwise go to energy bills, which allows companies and consumers to find more productive investments for this money. More than 200 bills were introduced just this year alone. Building codes, energy performance requirements for buildings, and financing are some of the top issues. So I'll just focus on one particular issue, which is combined heat and power, or cogeneration, as I mentioned earlier, which was also useful for energy security and energy assurance. But combined heat and power can be utilized either natural gas or biomass to power to generate electricity, but also to utilize heat to generate heat as well, which can be used for heating, or also the energy from the heat can be used for cooling as well. So 23 states encourage cogeneration technology development through rebates, grants, and loan programs. Other incentives include net metering for cogeneration equipment and inclusion in renewable electricity standards. An example would be Georgia's Senate Bill 51, which provides financing of distributed generation through leases, power purchase agreements, and other financing mechanisms, and Oregon's House Bill 2300, which provides tax credits for efficient heat and power facilities. So I will...
Thank you, Glenn, and thank you, Jacqueline, for the information about energy. So we're going to shift gears now to transportation priorities. Speaking first will be Jamie Rawl about transportation funding and finance, followed by Ann Teagan on traffic safety in rural areas. Jamie.
Thank you very much, Jim. Hello, everybody. I'm Jamie Rawl, and today I will be speaking about transportation funding and finance, a hot topic in 2013. Finding ways to pay for transportation projects certainly isn't a new challenge for states. The issue, however, has reached a new level of crisis and high-profile attention in the past few years. States across the nation now face a well-documented and worsening transportation funding crisis, characterized by chronic structural gaps between investment needs and current revenues at all levels of government. Experts agree that the nation as a whole is spending only a half to a third of what is needed to maintain and improve the nation's transportation system. The reasons for the gap are many, including years of underinvestment coupled with aging infrastructure and growing transportation demand. Also, gas tax revenues, the primary source of funding for transportation, have not kept up with needs for reasons that include increasing vehicle fuel efficiency, alternative fuel vehicles, changing travel patterns and less driving nationwide, and the falling purchasing power of gas taxes in light of inflation and rising construction costs. Every state levies taxes on gasoline and diesel, and states rely heavily on these revenues for transportation funding. Gas taxes provide close to 40% of all state revenues for highways and a whopping 92% of the revenues for the Federal Highway Trust Fund. This American Petroleum Institute map shows gas tax rates across the country as of January. Total state taxes on gasoline range from 8 cents per gallon in Alaska to about 51 cents a gallon in New York. Nationwide, the average state gas tax today is about 30 cents per gallon. One problem with the long-term sustainability of the gas tax as a source of transportation revenues is that in most states, these taxes don't track with the economy. Gas taxes are typically assessed on a flat cents per gallon basis, where the same number of cents are collected per gallon of gas purchased year after year, regardless of inflation or construction costs. Plus, many states haven't raised these taxes in years or even decades. The graph on this slide from the Institute on Taxation and Economic Policy shows just how long it's been since states last raised their gas taxes. As of January, 17 states had not raised these taxes in more than 20 years. As a result, after accounting for growth in construction costs, the average state's gas tax rate has effectively fallen by 20% since the last time it was increased. This means that states have seen the purchasing power of those revenues drop by a nationwide total of $10 billion each year. Further, state gas taxes are a less significant component of household budgets than they have been in roughly 80 years, 8 decades. Today, the average family pays just over $200 per vehicle per year on both federal and state gas taxes combined. Revenues from the federal gas tax are declining for the same reasons. The federal tax has been stagnant at a rate of 18.4 cents per gallon since 1993. The national recession has also had an impact on transportation funding. Although state fiscal conditions have been gradually improving, state tax collections tend to lag behind other indicators of economic recovery, and overall are just now returning to pre-recession levels in about half the states. The many competing demands for already overstretched state dollars have in many cases led to the diversion of revenues that were dedicated to transportation, such as gas taxes, to plug other holes in state budgets. Finally, states have for years now faced deep uncertainty in federal transportation programs. The federal law that governs and funds surface transportation, including both highways and transit, was on short-term extensions from mid-2009 to mid-2012. The close to 3-year delay left states trying to manage and plan large-scale, long-term programs with only limited, short-term federal funds and no clarity about what lay ahead. At least at the federal level, transportation now faces its own fiscal cliff. The federal program has been reauthorized for just 27 months, and the core program of funding sustainability has only been put off, not solved. If the current gap between federal transportation revenues and spending continues, both the highway account and the mass transit account in the Federal Highway Trust Fund will be unable to meet their obligations sometime in 2015. Another issue is the deep automatic cuts of sequestration that take effect this month. Various transportation programs face cuts, including general fund transfers to the Highway Trust Fund. Federal transportation programs now depend on general funds to close funding shortfalls. To put this in perspective, 18% of the current federal transportation authorization law, known as MAP 21, was funded by general fund transfers. As a result, a recent NCSL survey found that, overall, state lawmakers expressed pessimism or distrust of help from the federal government, and an awareness that states will likely have to take on more responsibility for planning and funding transportation infrastructure. The costs of ongoing underinvestment are high as funding gaps hasten the decline of aging transportation infrastructure across the states. On the left here is the American Society of Civil Engineers 2009 Infrastructure Report Card, in which aviation, bridges, roads, rail, and transit each got a grade of C or lower. According to the Society, deteriorating surface transportation infrastructure costs U.S. households and businesses nearly $130 billion in various costs and time delays in 2010 alone. If current trends continue, the costs associated with the infrastructure deficit will reach more than $200 billion each year in the next 7 years and more than $500 billion per year by 2040. So what's the good news? States are making transportation a policy priority in 2013 and taking the lead in addressing the problem. Governors, legislators, and state legislative fiscal officers have all identified transportation infrastructure as a top issue this year, with the key question being, how can states fund and provide needed transportation infrastructure in a time of change and uncertainty, and with or without long-term sustainable federal programs? States have considered a wide range of options for delivering transportation infrastructure, and many of those are on the table again in 2013. These include funding measures to provide new or increased revenues, financing tools to leverage or borrow against existing revenues, and efforts to ensure that transportation dollars are being used efficiently, accountably, and for their intended purposes. This slide shows the revenue sources now in use by states to fund roads, bridges, rail, and transit. These sources of funds are especially important because states provide nearly half of all surface transportation funding, compared to the federal contribution of only about 20%. State taxes on gasoline and diesel are the largest single source of funds for highway purposes in half the states. And 5 states tie those rates to inflation or another index. Other state revenue sources, from the most to least common, include DMV fees such as registration, license, and titling fees, vehicle or truck weight fees, interest income, general funds, motor vehicle or rental car sales taxes, tolls, sales taxes on fuel or other taxes on fuel distributors or suppliers, and diverse other sources such as dedicated sales tax revenues, congestion pricing, tobacco taxes, and state lotteries. States also continue to look at possible replacements for or supplements to the gas tax, given the concerns about its long-term sustainability as a source of revenue for transportation projects and maintenance. One alternative that has been widely discussed is the possibility of a fee that drivers could be charged based on the number of miles they drive instead of the gallons of gas they buy. This would be called a vehicle miles traveled or VMT fee. These fees are still very experimental. So far, 18 states have undertaken pilot projects, but none has widely implemented such a fee. Another option is to have special fees or taxes on alternative fuel or electric vehicles, or on alternative fuels themselves, such as compressed natural gas or biodiesel. At least 27 states now impose taxes on some alternative fuels, and most dedicate those revenues at least partly to transportation. Plus, at least 3 states impose a special fee on alternative fuel vehicles. At least 16 states have had major discussions about transportation revenue so far in 2013, with more being added every day. This is a moving target, so if you do know about any state not listed here, please let me know after the webinar. My contact details will be on the final slide. You can't talk about transportation funding proposals in 2013 without talking about Virginia. House Bill 2013 is now awaiting the governor's signature and would make Virginia the first state to repeal its cents per gallon gas tax altogether and replace it with a percentage-based tax on fuels plus a dedicated portion of a boosted general sales tax. The bill also creates a $100 annual fee on hybrid alternative fuel and electric vehicles. It's estimated that the total package will raise about $880 million annually by 2018. As of this week, Maryland looks like the next state to consider a similar overhaul of transportation funding. On Monday, the governor and legislative leaders put forth a plan to raise $800 million annually by reducing the per gallon gas tax, but tying the rate to inflation and levying a new wholesale tax on fuel sales. The proposal would also index transit fares and issue new state bonds for infrastructure projects. Another notable development this year is that last month, Wyoming enacted a 10-cent gas tax increase from 14 to 24 cents a gallon that will go into effect this July. Other state proposals of interest include Oregon's proposal to assess vehicle miles traveled fees on high-efficiency vehicles starting in 2015, Washington's 10-year, $10 billion Connecting Washington legislative package, and New Hampshire, which is considering funding roads through casino revenues. This slide shows how states finance transportation projects, meaning leveraging or borrowing against existing transportation revenues through various kinds of bonding and debt, or innovative contracting mechanisms such as design, build, and public-private partnerships. Public-private partnerships, or PPPs, continue to be of interest in the states this year. PPPs cover as many as a dozen types of innovative contracting, project delivery, and financing arrangements, each of which allows the private sector to take on responsibilities and risks traditionally undertaken by the state. Unlike true privatization, though, PPPs keep assets under the control and ownership of the public sector. If done well, PPPs can offer many potential benefits, such as accelerated project delivery and cost savings. But what they can't do is create or raise new revenue sources for states. They are not a source of free money. The private sector must be paid back and make a return on its investment, usually from traditional sources such as taxes, tolls, fares, or fees. Finally, states are also looking at ways to ensure that transportation dollars are used efficiently, accountably, and for their intended purposes through protecting transportation revenues or banning transfers or diversions of those revenues, or through streamlining projects, consolidating or reforming government agencies, or giving more responsibility to local governments. They're also looking at increased accountability through enhanced reporting requirements and performance management. This last slide shows a sampling of such proposals on the table in 2013. In Georgia, a proposed bill would exempt certain projects from some studies or requirements. In Kansas, the governor is proposing to merge the Turnpike Authority into the state DOT and use the savings, at least in part, for transportation investments. South Carolina's governor said in her State of the State address that she will not support a gas tax increase, but does propose to stop gas tax revenues from being diverted away from bridges and highways. And in Washington, part of the Connecting Washington bill package seeks to optimize the state DOT's efficiency, stewardship, and expediency in project spending and delivery. In the same way that states are leading the way in transportation funding and finance, with or without reliable federal support, the same trends are showing up in other areas of transportation policy. To speak more about this in rural traffic safety, here's my colleague, Ann Teagan.
Hello, I am going to talk about traffic safety on rural roads. In 27 states, more than 75% of the total roadway mileage is on roadways designated as rural, which means many of your state's motorists are driving on the open road, where there are a disproportionate number of crashes. According to NHTSA data, although 19% of the U.S. population lived in rural areas in 2010, rural fatalities accounted for 55% of all traffic fatalities in 2010. Now the question is, why are rural roads more dangerous for motorists? And the answer is, rural roads provide vital social and commercial links for a widely dispersed population. But the realities of rural roads and highways are that there is limited or no public transportation. Teens must drive distances to get to work and school. In rural areas, there are higher rates of lack of seatbelt use, higher use of alcohol while driving, and speeding. Narrow roads lack shoulders and clear zones that can provide an area of recovery for roadway departures. And these run-off-the-road road incidences are the most prevalent crash type on these rural roadways. When accidents occur in rural areas, lower traffic flows can mean that crash scenes may not be discovered for a longer period of time, and the distance to emergency care also increases in rural areas. Now, state governments are working on policies and solutions to work with rural communities to reduce risk to driver safety on rural roads. Before we talk about what's going on in the states, I'm going to explain what happened between the Federal Surface Transportation Reauthorization and Safety Lieu to MAP 21. At the federal level, with the passage of MAP 21 last July, there were some changes to rural transportation safety programs. Included in the previous reauthorization, Safety Lieu, were funds for the High Risk Rural Roads program. MAP 21 eliminated the $90 million annual set-aside for safety spending on high-risk rural roads, or any public road in a rural area identified in the safety plan as having significant safety risks. But these roads won't necessarily be neglected under MAP 21. If fatalities on these roads increase under MAP 21, states must spend a minimum amount of safety roads on these funds. So although there have been funding changes at the federal level, many states are making significant strides in improving traffic safety in rural areas through changes in state law and policy. Minnesota changed its seatbelt law to a primary law, allowing law enforcement officials to stop and ticket a driver solely for not wearing a seatbelt. The Center for Excellence in Rural Safety at the University of Minnesota found that from the time the law went into effect in 2009 to 2011, there had been 68 fewer deaths, 320 fewer severe injury crashes, and 432 fewer moderate injury crashes. This reduction in deaths and injuries has also saved $45 million in medical costs. Kansas, a highly rural state, amended its driver's licensing law to include requiring a 12-month permit holding period that includes logging practice driving hours, nighttime driving restrictions, and passenger restrictions, and cell phone restrictions for young drivers with intermediate permits. Data has shown that teen drivers make up about 8% of all drivers in Kansas, but before the GDL law, they were involved in 22% of the crashes, 16.9 of which were fatal. The preliminary 2011 numbers show that teen involvement has fallen to 18.5%, and the percentage of fatal teen crashes fell to 11.9%. Another state, Mississippi, is looking at road engineering and identifying cost-effective improvements to keep vehicles in the correct lanes and from driving off the road. In 2007, the Mississippi DOT Strategic Highway Safety Plan included lane departure crashes as a significant emphasis area. The Mississippi DOT reported that lane departure crashes accounted for 60% of all fatal crashes in the state, and more than 2,500 crashes between 2005 and 2009. Rumble strips can now be found on nearly every state road in Mississippi, with an expected 32% reduction in run-off-the-road crashes. Cable barriers have also been a tremendous success, with an expected 92% reduction in rural head-on fatalities along the hundreds of miles of rural interstate in Minnesota where they've been deployed. Mississippi, pardon me. In 2013, state legislatures are continuing to work toward more safety on rural roads. New Mexico, Montana, North Dakota, Nebraska, and West Virginia all introduced primary seatbelt laws this year. And the Montana DOT has contracted with the State Highway Patrol to deploy a roving patrol to high crash corridors located statewide. This program, called the Strategic Traffic Enforcement Team, is expanded in 2013 to include both day and nighttime patrols. Daytime patrols will focus on safety belt education and enforcement, while nighttime patrols will focus on impaired driving enforcement. For more information about traffic safety measures, please visit our website at www.ncsl.org.
Well, thank you to all the presenters this afternoon. We now have time to address some of the questions that have come in. The first question is related to hydraulic fracturing. So, Jacqueline, I'm going to direct this your way. Has the volume of legislation related to hydraulic fracturing this year been more than you've seen in previous years? And if so, why do you think that is?
Yeah, that's a great question, and the answer is absolutely. The level of legislative activity and interest has grown significantly in the last 2 or 3 years, and a lot of this has to do with the activity moving into the extraction activity moving into more densely populated regions and also into states that are unfamiliar with extraction-type industries. So, for instance, more than 50 bills were introduced in New York, more than 30 bills were introduced in Pennsylvania on this issue, and that has a lot to do with, especially in New York, learning what it's like to have the extraction industry move into the state, whereas a state like Texas, which has a really comprehensive regulatory scheme to date, you don't really see quite as much legislative activity. So the answer is yes.
Okay, great. Thank you. Another question that came in is related to the vehicle miles traveled fee that you mentioned briefly, Jamie. So there's some elaboration here, and the question is, what progress have states made in, if any, studying and implementing a vehicle miles traveled fee approach to funding transportation needs?
Sure. Well, states are really looking at a wide range of options to deal with the impact on transportation funding as a result of more fuel-efficient vehicles and alternative fuel vehicles. Vehicle miles traveled fees so far have kind of arisen as the consensus choice in discussions about where we're going long-term in transportation funding, but that's by no means assured. And we're nowhere near a tipping point with them right now. Still very experimental. As I mentioned, 18 states have undertaken pilot projects, but no state has widely implemented such a fee. Oregon right now is considering a bill to put a fee in place for high-efficiency vehicles by 2015. But so far, there's no state that has really implemented it. And there are a lot of reasons for that, including concerns about public acceptance. For the more high-tech options that have been tested that would track vehicles, there are concerns about privacy, the government knowing where your car is at any given time. And there's also concerns on the public sector side about the lack of a policy framework right now for shifting the entire funding system over to VMT fees, as well as the implementation costs. Right now, we collect gas taxes and the infrastructure is all in place. Moving over to a new system for all vehicles has a lot of costs and a lot of infrastructure changes associated with it. So there are a lot of reasons that states are still exploring this and looking into it, and there are reasons why they haven't quite taken off yet. But every year we're seeing increasing numbers of bills looking either at the viability and sustainability of the gas tax in general or establishing or studying state-level VMT fees in the specific. So I expect to see even more of those coming up this year.
Thank you, Jamie. The next question is for Glenn. Glenn, in your presentation, you mentioned the terminology net metering, and one of the questions that came in is if you can just give an explanation of what net metering means.
Sure, Jim. On its face, it can be sound a bit complicated. It's actually just a way for producers of energy, small distributed energy producers, for instance, a household that sells solar panels on their roof, doesn't necessarily utilize that energy as it's produced. They may be gone working during the day. They may utilize their energy, need electricity more likely at night. So it's a way for basically the producer to sell that energy back to the grid and then or receive a credit. They may or may not, depending on how the net metering system is set up, receive potentially money for the electricity they're producing or just credits towards their bill, meaning that they will actually, whatever they produce, they can count against what they consume. So that's basically a major incentive for folks that do purchase distributed energy generation systems, such as combined heat and power or wind, small wind or solar energy to install on the roof. And again, the community net metering amount allows, say, a condo association which may have some space nearby, say, to put small wind or put solar on a field next door, perhaps, and then also count that as production. Count that production against their consumption of electricity with the utility.
Thank you for that, Glenn. Well, that is the conclusion of the questions that have come in. On the screen before you are the names and email addresses of all of our experts today that spoke, and so feel free to contact them if you think of a question or just have other issues that you want to raise with one of our policy experts here at NCSL. And with that, I want to thank all the participants that came in today for the webinar on energy and transportation. We appreciate your participation, and we look forward to serving you in other ways here at NCSL. Thank you, and have a nice day.
Thank you. This does conclude today's teleconference. We thank you for your participation. You may disconnect your lines at this time. Have a great day.